So now we're on Daf Tzadi Heyamid Beis. Ella Amar Rava. What does the Bryce have in mind when it says an Isur Kal to derive a Kal V'chomer? Eishes Ish, a married woman who has an adulterous relationship. The Isur. V'chein ki asir Ravin Amar Rab Yochanan le'Eishes Ish. Now, why is this called an Isur Kal? Umay kari le Isur Kal. She'ein ha'osra kol Yevamot. In other words, a Baal could divorce his wife at any time and remove the Isur to others, even during his lifetime. It's not like a Achos Ishto, who's Asura Olav as long as his wife is alive, even after he divorces his wife. A man is not allowed to marry Achos Grushasa. Tanya Nami Hachi, we support this with Braysa B'Chanan Omar, Mishum Rabbi Lazar, Eishes Ish. We're going to derive the Isur from the Isur of Eishes Ish with a Kal V'chomer to the Isur of Achosa. Uma b'makom haba al Isur Kal. And once again, why is Eishes Ish classified as an Isur Kal? It's because he could divorce her. She'ein ha'osra kol Yamav. Because the Baal who married her did not generate an Isur l'gabi acherim. For his entire lifetime, he could be matu that Isur based on a get, by giving a get. And nevertheless, Nesar Oser, meaning the Baal becomes Oser. Right. So the Baal is the Oser. He generated Isur on the Boel, and now he becomes Nesar. That's called the He Nitma, correct? Is Habal Isur Chamur, the case of Achos Ishto, where there's no heter get, She HaOsra, meaning she, the sister, the wife of this husband, generates the Isur on Achosa, Osra, Kol Yamav. She, the wife, generates an Isur on the Baal vis-a-vis her sister for the entire lifetime of the Oser, meaning of the Isha herself. Kol Yimei Chayel. So that even if the husband will divorce her, she still remains Asura Olav, the Isra Achos Ishto, Zaino Din, how much more so, Shenesar HaOsra. Just not sure why the Gemara doesn't point out about Tuma Beguf at this point. Anyway, Talmud Lomar, and this whole discussion that we had today, from the beginning till the end, is all to justify the special mute of the pasuk that B'Shachav each osa. We can medayik from the word osa, shchivas osarta, the ain shchivas achosa osarta. Why doesn't the Gemara give the same pircha of Tumas Haguf? Do you have any notes on this? I mean, it's such an obvious question. Why, unless I'm missing something. Maybe this is the Riz Kasha, perhaps, on the second line on the top of the Amud. As Kasha Larid Nakati Tikchile Kol Hani Pirchi Diliel, Shekei Nitma Guf, Visura Barov. Oh, Baksha Kivanti. I didn't know about this. All right. Okay, now we go from the frying pan to the fire. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Kol she posal yidei acherim, posal yidei atzmo. Kol she ein posal yidei acherim, ein posal yidei atzmo. Ma'ikam Rabbi Yossi. What is the meaning of Rabbi Yossi's cryptic statement, and to what extent is he rejecting the Tanakh? And the Gemara is going to go through a number of different possibilities and reject them one by one. Ilema, if we're going to suggest Dika Omar Tanakama. Now we're going to explain the statement of the Tanakama and then understand why Rabbi Yossi responded to the Tanakama, rejected the Tanakama. But what did the Tanakama say? The Azul Ishto Vegisal of Dina Sayam. So two people went out to yonder. One was the husband. Okay, maybe we'll give it names. Let's say, oh, he has names over here. So Rachel and Leah are sisters. Avram marries Rachel, and Yitzchak marries Leah. Now, Avram's wife Rachel and Avram's brother-in-law Yitzchak, who's married to his wife's sister Leah, go out to Medina Sayam. Now, one witness comes and testifies in front of Avram that his wife died, meaning Rachel died. Now a witness comes to Leah and tells her that her husband Yitzchak died. So Leah is no longer an Eshes Ish if her husband Yitzchak died. She's not Asur on Avram if Avram's wife Rachel died, meaning the sister of Leah. And so therefore Avram went ahead and he married Leah. Now Rachel, his wife, comes back. Yitzchak, his brother-in-law, comes back. They're all alive. And now Leah was married off to Avram in the Isser of Eshes Ish. And at the same time, Achos Isha. So according to the Tanakama, in this case, Eshes Gisaso Asura. In other words, Leah is not permitted to resume her relationship with her husband Yitzchak. Because that's the law, that's the rule of Nises Alpi Bezdin, meaning Alpi Eid Echad. And she's Asura L'Baila. So if she got married based on the testimony of one Eid, and now her husband turns out to be alive, she's not permitted to go back and resume a relationship with her husband. However, as far as Rachel is concerned, she's muteres, she could resume her relationship with Avram when she comes back alive. Uka'amar le Rav Yossi, and Rav Yossi turns to the Tanakama and rejects the din of the Tanakama because with regard to an Eshes Ish who married someone else mistakenly based on the testimony of an aid, the Chachamim said that she's Asura Lachso L'Baila. We're afraid that if she resumes her relationship with her husband, then people are going to say that she had a get from her husband. She married the second guy, Kedas Ukedin. And Rabbi Yossi says that after she gets a get from her second husband, she can't go back to her first husband because people are going to say that you're allowed to remarry your divorcee after she got married to someone else. Therefore, applying that reasoning in our Mishnah, if we assume that there's a chashash that people will say about Eshes Giso, that's Leah, that she was married to Avram, then she's now Achos Grushasa, right? Because we're going to require that Leah receives a get, and therefore Rachel is Achos Grushasa, as far as Avram is concerned. And again, why does Leah require a get? Because people might think that she was legally married to Avram because her husband Yitzchak gave her a get. Yehechi de Ishto Sharya is Eshes Giso Nami Sharya. So therefore, Rabbi Yossi comes to the conclusion that the Rabbanan never made such an Isa. And what's his name? Avram is allowed to resume his relationship with his wife Rachel. And Kamochen, and therefore by equation, Eshes Giso Nami Sharia, meaning that Leah is allowed to resume her marriage relationship with Yitzchak. Because she's not going to receive a get from Avram, which would make it look like they were legitimately married. So the Gemara says, all right, that's a theoretical and attractive interpretation of Rabbi Yossi, but it doesn't fit into the words of Rabbi Yossi. Because the Hachi, and now we need two quotes. Quote number one, which is the quote from our Mishnah, Kol she'ein posal yidei acher ve'ein posal yidei atzmo, which means that since his bia does not passel her to acherim, it doesn't passel her to himself. Well, that's not true. We're saying just the opposite. That since his wife is muteris lo, therefore the Chacham did not require that the Eshes Giso get a get. And therefore she's muteris to resume her relationship Leah with Yitzchak. Is now we say no. What should have been written in the Mishnah is Kol she'ein posel al yidei atzmo, eino posel al yidei acheru. If his bia bachos ishto does not pasel her isha, then eino posel b'bias al yidei acherim. In other words, that's achos ishto al gisasa, or Leah on Yitzchak mibayli. That's what it should have said. So again, let's go over this one more time. In the Mishnah, it says, Kol she'ein posal yidei acherim, ein posal yidei atzmo, which sounds like we're saying that since his bia does not generate any isu to acherim, it doesn't generate isu to himself, we're saying just the opposite. That since ishto muteris lo, therefore Eshes Giso is muteris legiso. So it should have therefore said, Kol she'ein posal yidei atzmo, meaning that this bia does not generate an isur between Avram and his wife Rachel, is eino posel al yidei acherim. It cannot generate an isur on the gis. Who did we call them? Yitzchak, on his wife Leah. So now the Gemara is going to suggest another interpretation of Rabbi Yossi. But rather the Ella, this is what Rabbi Yossi has in mind, Ki hechi di eshes giso asira, ishto nami asira. To the same extent that that Leah cannot resume her relationship with Yitzchak, and that's called eshes giso asira. And that's basically just an application of the general rule that we learned over and over again, that if a woman gets married based on the testimony of one aide, and that marriage is going to be recognized midrabanan to generate an iser on her Baal is therefore ishtonami asira. In other words, when he marries the wife of his sister, the Rabbanan are going to recognize that marriage and therefore generate an Isur on his own wife. So the Gemara rejects this interpretation as well. Why? We're going to again analyze the language of Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah. I can understand the first statement of the two statements of Rabbi Yossi. The first statement was Kol sheposel yidei acher posel yidei atzmo, meaning that since there's an Isur of Leah onto Yitzchak, right, his wife's sister onto his brother-in-law, which means that she Leah will need a get from Avram, and that's going to passel her on Yitzchak. But what are we going to do with the Seifa of Rabbi Yossi? Kol she'eno posel, quote, Kol she'eno, I'll read the whole quote. Kol she'eno posel yidei acherim, eno posel yidei atzmo, maya vidite. Well, what case are we, what scenario are we referring to? I mean, there's no case in the Mishnah where Eishes Giso is not Asur al Baila. Okay, so now Rabbi Ami, is going to try to explain the end of the words of Rabbi Yossi, the siyum of Rabbi Yossi. Arecha. It's going back to the din that appears in the beginning, at the beginning of our parak, actually, the beginning of the Mishnah. And what does it say there? Niseis al pi bezdin, teitze, uptur ben akarbon. But al pi edim teitze v'chayeves b'karbon. Is yafa kocho shel bezdin shep potra min akarbon. So the Mishnah says that if the heter to marry was based on the testimony of one witness, and then her husband turns out alive, then she has to terminate her relationship with the second husband, and she's married to the first husband, obviously, because he's still alive. She doesn't bring a karmachatas on her shkaga because she was relying on the Bezdin. The Bezdin relied on the Erech and gave her a psaka ruling to get married. So Yachid Kasal Pioras Bezdin ain't no chayv chatas. But now we have a case of Nisalpi Edim. There were two Edim testified her husband died. And we don't have to operate through Bezdin. She can rely on these two Edim to get married. And now exactly what she did, and then her husband turns out, comes back a lot, is Teitze. She has to terminate the relation with her second husband, that's obvious. She can't pin her innocence by blaming Bezdin because Bezdin wasn't even involved in it. There was no Horas Bezdin that would pot her up from a carbon. And therefore, Yafa Kochel Shel Bezdin Shepotrim in a carbon. Meaning in the case of Eid Echad, where Bezdin gave the heter that she can get remarried based on his testimony, then if he turns out to be alive, she doesn't have to bring a carbon. But in Niseis Al Pi Edim, that's a whole different story. Now, in this Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon says that if she was Nisal Pi Edim, Muteris Laxar Labaila, that was this radical shita of Rabbi Shimon on the previous daf. It means like there's no element of pshia, of knas, because they relied on the testimony of two Edim. But now on that Mishnah at the beginning of the Perek, Uka Omar Tanakama, on this Mishnah, the Tanakama made his comment that the din of a woman who comes from Medina Sayyam and she's allowed to resume her relationship with her husband is Loshn al pi edim, etc. Loshn al pi bezdin. Loshn al pi edim, who say that your sister died and your brother-in-law died. At H's Gisok Sharia, according to the Tanakama, the second husband, Yitzchak, is permitted to resume his relationship with Leah. Veloshna al pi bezdin, and the same applies if Bezdin were the one who gave the het because it was only one aid, one witness. The Eishes Giso Asira. In all cases, Leah is prohibited to resume her relationship with her husband, Yitzchak. Because this is a case of Isha Sheba Baila mi Medina Sayyam, so what the Tanakh is saying is that as far as Avram resuming his relationship with Rachel, that's mutter, and that is not whether Eishes Giso is Sharia's Muteris or Eishes Giso is Asira. So in other words, we're separating between two issues. One issue is as far as the resumption of the marriage between Leah and Yitzchak, and that might be prohibited. And the other issue is whether or not Rachel can resume her marriage with Avram, and that's always going to be permitted. Now he gives a little bit of an explanation here. He says, "Keman she'ein lomar she'achosa nisgarsha mibayla rishon v'nisa lebal achosa behete." Why is this impossible? 1 second, I'm missing a piece here. It's impossible to say that her sister was divorced. And that's why. Because the Gerushin would not permit him to marry her sister. Because as long as his wife is alive, he cannot marry her sister. It's therefore it turns out that that marriage to her sister was an Issa Kares, and she doesn't need a get because everybody, it's obvious that that marriage is totally invalid. So therefore, Rachel, that's Avram's original wife, is not considered Achos Grushaso because there's no need for Avram to deliver a get to Leah. And the reason for that is because Leah's Achos Grushaso, even if I would have assumed that Ruvain, that I call him Ruvain, but I mean Avram, had given a get to his wife Rachel. So that's the Shita of the Tanakh. Rabbi Yossi disagrees, and he says that Nises Alpi Bezdin, when the Bezdin gave her a heter based on testimony of 1:8 and she got married, to Posel al Yidei Acherim. This is where I got stuck. Okay, let's see if we can work it out. The Posal Yidei Acherim. Right, his marriage to this sister. Right. We said Loshna al pi bezdin. We said the ishto, the eshes giso asira. So when Bezdin gave her a heter, and what? Let's go over it again. And what happened? And now what? What happened? Rachel got married to Yitzchak. Is that what we're talking about? Right, because we assume that Rachel had received a get, and then his marriage to Leah was valid. No, that doesn't make any sense. One more time. Ishto giso asira lebaila. He writes here in the footnote, Betalma dover she'eshes giso asura lebaila. Efshel lefarish she'sava Rabbi Ami she'eshes ish she'nisa li'acher betov asura lebaila mishum knas. Shekonsua chacham al shelo bira karoi. Al kein af the Ashes Giso, that's Leah, She'ein Lomer Bosh and is Garsha Baila bin Nosa Asheni Kidin, Yeshli Osro Lebaila. So in any event, the bottom line here is that Ashes Giso Asura, and that means that Leah cannot resume her relationship with Yitzchak because Yitzchak never died, and therefore Leah was an Ashes Ish who was married to Avram, and that generates an Isser on the Baal. And that's something that even the Tanakhama says. But comes with Rabbi Yossi, and he says that since in that case of Ashes Giso Asira, which is Alpi Bezdin, who are matir Leah to marry Avram, based on the testimony of 1:8, the posal yidei acherim, right, and that's true even according to the Tanakhama, is posal yidei atzma. Then even with regard to the relationship between Avram and Rachel, when Rachel comes back alive, that too is us, and they cannot resume that relation. She's considered achos ishto. But in the case of Alpi Edim, who are matir the the woman, meaning Leah, to get married is Eino Posal Yidei Acher. Right, and here we're invoking the Shita Rabbi Shimon, that even though she was an Ashes Ish, once she gets married, I'll be to aid them, then she can resume a relation with her husband when he comes back along. And that's called Eino Posal Yidei Atzmo, which means that Ishto Muteres Lo, we're not going to say that Ashes Giso is considered Ki Ishto, and therefore Lo Osra Allah Ves Ishto Mishum Achos Ishto. Now the Gemara offers another explanation, Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Omar, Li Olam, we're going to assume that Rabbi Yossi is not making his comment on the Mishnah at the beginning of the parak, as we assumed according to Rama, but rather a sefer. It's referring to the sefer of our Mishnah. And that's the case of a woman who gets married based on the testimony of one aide who testified that her husband and her sister died. Now here there's a girsa problem. Ha dinosiv eshes giso, for ha dinosiv arusas giso. So it means that Rabbi Yotzi, that refers to Nasiv Eshes Gisa, right, where he married Leah, the wife of his brother-in-law Yitzchak. But Rabbi Yossi says that Shepasal al Acher Pasal Yideatzma, that's the Nasiv Arusas Gisa. Now let's leave out the brackets because now the Gemara says it explicitly. Hadi Azle Arusaso Vigiso, Hadi Azlo Ishta Nesualo Vigiso. Yossi, when he said that Pasal al Acher and Pasal Atzmo, that's a case where his Arusa, not his wife, but his Arusa and Giso. So there was only an Erison relation between Rachel and Avram. So Rachel goes out to Medina Sayyam together with his brother-in-law Yitzchak. Now one aide testifies that they died. Arutzasa and Giso died. He marries now Leah. Now these two fellows came back alive. So that's going to be a case of Kshenifsal Acher Pasal al Atzmo, but Rabbi Yossi, who says that Kishalo Pasal Acherim Afal Atzmo in a pot, so that's the Ozli Ishto Vigisa. Now, why should that make a difference, whether it's Ishto or whether it's Arusasa? So the Gemara explains, Uka Omer Tanakama. So the Tanakama says, right, Tanakama doesn't say anything about the din of Eshes Giso. It just says Stam, without qualifying, Ishto. Therefore, Losha Ishto V'Giso, Losha Arutzasa V'Giso, Eshes Giso Asira, V'Ishto Sharia. It's again the same logic that we said before. So the Tanakama doesn't tolerate any distinction between Arusaso and Ishto. Uka Amale Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi turns to Tanakama. And the logic of H's Ish, who relied on the testimony of one aide that she's not allowed to resume her relationship with her husband, is not because of Knas, but because we're afraid that the spectator will come to the conclusion that the second marriage, the marriage to the Sheni, was Kedasu Kedin, and she originally got a get from her husband. So if we're going to allow her to go back and resume her marriage relationship, they're going to say that you're allowed to be Machzir Gush also after Nesuin. If that be the case, then now I could justify the difference between Ishto and Arusasa. If it was Ishto v'Giso, so Ishto Nesualo, and Baal Achos Ishto went out to Medina Sayyam. And based on the testimony of one aide, he goes ahead and marries the sister of his wife because he believes that Rachel is dead based on the testimony of one aide. Now they come back and Rachel's alive and well. So in this case, we're going to say that Ishto, meaning Rachel, is allowed to resume her marriage with Reuven, with Avram, and Eshes Giso, meaning Leah, is also allowed to resume her marriage with what do we call Yitzchak? Why? Delekala Meimar Tnoa Havile Benisuin. We're not going to be afraid of the possibility that the spectator will think that in the original Nisuin, when Yitzchak, what was his name? Avram married Rachel, it was B'Tanai, and the Tanai was not Makuyim, and therefore the marriage was never valid. And now when Avram goes ahead and marries Leah, after her husband Yitzchak delivered a get, so now we have a problem of Gushasa Leachar Shenises. If we're going to allow Rachel to go back to to Avram, then they're going to say that you're allowed to marry your Grusha after she was married to someone else, because this is the old principle of Ein Tanai B'Nesuin. So everybody knows that there's no bittul on Nesue Ishto, V'achoso. Achoso nisalo be'isur ubetos. Is dieno posel al yidei acher. Therefore, they're not going to say that she received a get from the gis, meaning from Yitzchak, and therefore she can go back to her husband, even after she was nises, and therefore ain't no posel al yidei atzma. Is arusoso v'giso. Right, because there was no Nisuin, so ain't Tanai ben Nisuin, but now there was only Erickson, so it's possible to say that there was a Tanai, which would mean that people will say that Leah, got a get from her husband Yitzchak, and she got married by Heter, Labal, She'iris Achosa, meaning to Avram, because it was a Tanai B'Kedushin to her sister Rachel, and that Tanai was never fulfilled, and therefore Batla Kedushin. So therefore, if Leah will go back and resume her relationship with the Yitzchak, they're going to say that it's Machzir Gushasa Mishenises. Uposel al Yidei Acheret. And since in the marriage to her sister, she generates an Isser on her Baal, because we're being choshesh that people will think that we're being matir a machzir grushas, which in this case is af posel idei atzma. Therefore, his wife is a surah olav, because otherwise they're going to come to be matir eishes giso legiso. So what we're up to here is Omar Rabbi Yehuda, Omar Shmuel halacha ki Rabbi Yossi. That's what we'll stop for today. Oh man, this is a killer. We're trying to do the best we can. I apologize. And we're falling a little bit behind.